I had been at Halverton Capital for 12 years. 12 years of late nights, endless client dinners, and poring over municipal bond data until the numbers blurred into one another. When I walked into the annual strategy meeting that morning, I wasn't expecting applause or a standing ovation, but I did expect acknowledgement, a word of recognition, a fair reward for keeping millions flowing steadily through the firm's most reliable division. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and bitter coffee. I took my seat, a quiet confidence in my chest. Then Malcolm Veyron, my vice president, slid a folded sheet across the table without even looking at me. I unfolded it, expecting to see the bonus I had earned. Instead, my stomach turned. $100. The year before, it had been $25,000. I looked up at him, searching for some mistake. His lips curled into a sneer. "You're only worth that pocket change," he said, his voice sharp enough to slice through the room. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to cut through my skin, to leave me sitting there with my dignity stripped bare, while colleagues I had mentored avoided my eyes. No one stood up for me. No one questioned it. I pressed the paper flat against the table, willing my hands not to shake. The urge to speak back burned at the back of my throat, but I swallowed it. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous responses were the ones never spoken aloud. So I stared at Malcolm, not with rage, but with something colder, something steady. He thought I had been diminished in that moment, that his words would reduce me to silence and obedience. He didn't know what silence could hold, beneath the surface, behind the quiet. I carried a legacy that wasn't Halverton's to touch, a file my late father had left me, gathering dust for years in a safe I had barely opened. Malcolm's laughter echoed in my ears as the meeting droned on. By the time I left that boardroom, I already knew I would unlock that safe before the night was over. That evening, I walked into my apartment still carrying the weight of the boardroom's laughter. The bonus slip lay crumpled in my bag, but it wasn't the money that stung, it was the insult that came with it. My father's voice returned to me, words he had spoken years ago in the quiet of his study. "These numbers may save you one day." I went to the back of the closet where his old safe sat untouched for more than a decade. The key was still on my keychain, a habit I never questioned until now. My hands didn't tremble as I slid it in and turned. The heavy door groaned open, releasing the faint smell of paper and iron. Inside were the files I remembered: contracts, reports, and handwritten notes. My father had been meticulous, unwilling to let discrepancies go unnoticed. I pulled the first folder free, spreading its contents across my kitchen table. Line after line of municipal bond records stared back at me. The longer I read, the sharper the picture became. Halverton had been bleeding cities dry for years. Inflated management fees disguised in fine print, hidden kickbacks routed through shell entities, signatures from executives who had smiled at investors while burying the truth. And there, stamped in black ink, was Malcolm Veyron's name on one of the inflated fee sheets. My chest tightened not with fear, but with certainty. My father hadn't collected these papers idly. He had known that corruption would one day come to light, and he had trusted me to decide when. I sat back, staring at the mess of numbers and signatures. I could have called a lawyer, handed everything over to regulators, let the process grind on for years. But the humiliation in that boardroom had clarified something: they would never hear my voice if I whispered through official channels. If I moved, I would move loudly. I gathered the most damning page, slid it into a fresh folder, and placed it on my desk where I could see it. By morning, I knew exactly what I would do with it. The page sat in front of me all night, its ink as sharp as the memory of Malcolm's laugh, One bond fee sheet, inflated by millions, with his signature pressed in, bold at the bottom. Numbers don't lie, not when they're this blatant. My father's voice echoed in my mind again. These numbers may save you one day. I didn't need all the files. Not yet. One page would be enough. One spark in a dry forest. I scanned it carefully, ensuring every detail was clear: the dates, the figures, the signatures. No commentary, no explanations, no accusations. The paper would speak for itself. My cursor hovered over the post button on X. For a moment, I thought of the years I had given Halverton, the loyalty that had been reduced to pocket change. Then I pressed send. The page appeared on my feed, stark against the endless noise of memes and market chatter. I expected silence, maybe a trickle of curiosity. Instead, within minutes, the notifications began. First, a retweet from a financial journalist, then another from a watchdog group. The floodgates opened. Comments exploded beneath the post. Some doubted its authenticity. Others dissected every line with forensic precision. Rival funds pounced, tagging regulators, demanding answers. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the table, each vibration a ripple spreading outward. By midnight, an analyst with 500,000 followers had written, "If this page is authentic, Halverton is staring at a corporate death sentence." The words were amplified again and again, bouncing across the industry like a warning bell. I didn't respond. I didn't add a word. I simply watched the storm grow, the truth carrying itself farther than I could have shouted. Somewhere in the city, Malcolm would wake to find his name plastered across headlines. Somewhere in Halverton's gleaming office tower, the same boardroom that had laughed at me would now be filled with silence. And I knew by morning, the shockwaves would be impossible to contain. By dawn, the document had spread far beyond my control. Headlines screamed across every financial site. Halverton fee sheet raises questions of fraud. Reporters parsed every digit, circling the signature at the bottom like blood in the water. I sat in my apartment, coffee cooling beside me, and watched the world finally look where it had refused to before. Within hours, the market answered louder than any journalist could. Halverton's stock plunged 30% before lunch, 40% by the closing bell. Investors dumped shares in a frenzy, terrified of what more might surface. Rival funds capitalized on the panic, shorting Halverton into the ground. Analysts on X speculated openly, if one page looks like this, what do the rest of the files show? I switched on the television just in time to see Malcolm appear on CNBC. His suit was pressed, his smile rehearsed, but I saw the strain tightening his jaw. "This is nothing but fake news from a disgruntled employee," he declared, waving away the allegations as though brushing lint from his sleeve. "We stand by our integrity." The anchor pressed him, citing my posted page line by line. His voice sharpened, his denials grew defensive, and by the end of the segment his smirk had curdled into irritation. Instead of quelling the storm, his appearance fanned the flames. Commentators immediately tore into his evasions, noting what he didn't say as much as what he did. I muted the television and leaned back, letting the noise fade into silence. This wasn't rage driving me anymore. It wasn't impulse. It was precision deliberate, timed, and inescapable. Every laugh that had echoed in that boardroom was being answered now, not by me, but by the weight of their own deceit. The numbers told their story better than I ever could, and the world was finally listening. As the sun slipped below the skyline, I closed my laptop and let the quiet settle in. Tomorrow would bring more chaos, but I was ready. The boardroom that had mocked me was about to catch fire from within. By the next morning, the news cycle had grown teeth. Every outlet was not only dissecting my post, but digging deeper. unearthing stories of irregularities that had been buried for years. Anonymous emails began surfacing, online snippets from former employees who had been silenced or discarded. Each one added fuel to the blaze. Inside Halverton, the panic was visible even from the outside. Reporters swarmed the lobby, cameras flashing as executives slipped through side doors. Shareholders convened emergency calls, demanding explanations. For the first time in years, the firm's polished image cracked wide open. From what I heard later, the boardroom was pure combustion. CEO Isolde Carrick demanded answers from Malcolm, her voice slicing through the din. But he refused to bend. He called it external sabotage, a coordinated smear meant to destabilize Halverton. He leaned on that word disgruntled, repeating it until it lost any weight. But while he ranted, new evidence surfaced. Journalists published copies of internal memos that lined up perfectly with the page I had released. Another whistleblower stepped forward, confirming that inflated fees were standard practice, not anomaly. Proof stacked upon proof, and denial had nowhere left to stand. Directors clashed in front of him, some insisting Malcolm resign immediately, others terrified of what his fall might reveal about their own signatures. The room that once roared with laughter at my expense now boiled with accusation and blame. Shareholders who had treated Halverton like untouchable royalty demanded blood. Calls for an internal investigation became shouts for external regulators to step in. Malcolm tried to shout louder, but arrogance no longer drowned out evidence. I watched it unfold from my apartment, the flicker of news coverage reflecting in the darkened glass of my window. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but inevitability. They had built their empire on sand, and the tide was finally rushing in. And as the board tore itself apart, I knew the story was far from finished. Somewhere in the noise, new voices were waiting to join me. The night after Halverton's boardroom unraveled across the news, I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, the city buzzing beyond the glass. My phone buzzed with a notification that caught my breath, a direct message from Talia Greaves. She had been a junior analyst, once sharp, unflinching, and too honest for her own survival. Months ago, she'd raised questions about anomalies in the bond fees. A week later, she was gone. The official line was performance issues, but everyone knew better. Now her message was simple. I believe you. I still have the emails. Minutes later, my inbox filled with forwarded chains, internal threads where Talia had flagged irregularities, only to be brushed aside. I scrolled through replies from senior managers dismissing her, some mocking her persistence, others warning her to let it go. Each email confirmed what I already knew: the rot had been visible, but no one had wanted to smell it. As I sifted through her trove, another memory stirred. I went back to my father's folder and pulled out a thick memo I hadn't fully read. It was signed by Aldous Fenwick, Halverton's former CFO. Years ago, he had circulated a warning to the board-inflated fees, undisclosed kickbacks, and legal risks that could collapse their municipal portfolio if exposed. The ink was blunt, unambiguous, and yet, Aldous had been early retired not long after, disappearing quietly from the industry without explanation. His memo had been buried, just like Talia's warnings, just like every trace of dissent that threatened Halverton's gleaming facade. The truth was clear. This wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate burial. They had always known. They had silenced anyone who tried to sound the alarm. I closed the folder and leaned back, the weight of Talia's courage and Aldous's warnings pressing into me. I was no longer standing alone. Shadows were stepping forward, carrying proof that had been waiting for the right spark. And now that the spark had caught, the fire was spreading faster than Halverton could smother it. It didn't take long for the collapse to turn into freefall. Within a week, Halverton's stock chart looked like a cliff face, 75% of its market value erased as if someone had taken an eraser to years of prestige. Shareholders who once bragged about their stakes now scrambled to sell what little they could salvage. Government regulators moved swiftly, launching formal investigations into municipal bond practices. Subpoenas began to land on desks that had once been untouchable. City councils froze their contracts with Halverton, citing pending review, leaving millions in projects suspended midstream. Investors who had once flooded our office with business now treated Halverton like a contagion. And at the center of it all, Malcolm staggered. Cameras found him everywhere, leaving cabs, entering restaurants, ducking through side doors. Each time, reporters shouted questions, demanding explanations. His once polished confidence curdled into desperation, and every denial he muttered only hardened the suspicion. Isolde Carrick, the CEO, tried to play the part of stability. She stood at podiums, assuring stakeholders that reforms were underway, that Halverton was resilient. But her words carried no weight. Confidence isn't rebuilt with speeches, it's built with trust. And trust had already dissolved into dust. I watched it all from a distance, never once stepping into the spotlight. No press conferences, no interviews, no need to gloat. I had said nothing, and yet my silence had dragged them to their knees. It wasn't vengeance in the traditional sense, it was exposure, pure and undeniable. In the quiet of my apartment, I let the storm rage without me. The city outside hummed on, unaware that its skyline had just lost one of its glittering pillars. But I knew this wasn't the end. Because when a company falls this far, someone always comes knocking, desperate for terms. The call came late in the evening, a carefully worded invitation from Isolde Carrick herself, requesting a private meeting. She didn't say why, but I already knew. When survival is at stake, pride has to wait. We met in a discreet conference room at a hotel far from Halverton's gleaming tower. She arrived first, poised as always, her pearl earrings catching the light. But her composure was thinner now, stretched tight over the panic she couldn't mask. "Corinna," she began, voice low. "We both know Halverton has been wounded, but it doesn't have to die. There's room to bargain." I didn't sit forward. I didn't smile. I simply laid my folder on the table and slid it toward her. "This isn't a negotiation. Isolde, these are the terms." She hesitated before opening it. Inside were 3 demands written as plainly as the numbers on my father's fee sheets. First, Malcolm Veyron must resign immediately and publicly. Second, every municipal bond contract must be restructured to strip out inflated fees and hidden kickbacks. Third, a compliance division must be rebuilt from the ground up, overseen by me, not as an employee, not as a token executive, but with full authority. Her eyes flashed with resistance. "You're asking me to hand you the keys to the division. Do you realize what that means?" I met her stare evenly. "It means survival. Without this, regulators will bury Halverton alive, and the shareholders will let them." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead light. I could see her calculating, weighing the pressure of regulators, the fury of shareholders, the chaos within her boardroom. Finally, she exhaled, long and slow. "You'll have it," she said. Her words sealed the shift. I wasn't the ridiculed manager they'd dismissed. I was the condition for their survival. And as I left the room, I knew rebuilding would begin on my terms alone. I declined every offer Isolde tried to dangle in front of me. No title, no press release, no ceremonial seat at the boardroom table. I had no interest in being paraded as their savior. My leverage was stronger in silence. I asked for a plain office tucked away from the executive floor, a place where the real work could begin without interference. The first step was Talia. I called her in personally, sliding her reinstatement letter across the desk. She looked at me with disbelief before her eyes hardened into resolve. "They buried me once," she said quietly, "but not again." That was all I needed to hear. Word spread quickly. Other analysts who had been ignored or quietly dismissed began reaching out, bringing with them fragments of evidence, warnings, and long-forgotten reports. I gathered them, not to shame them for their silence, but to give them a place where their voices would matter. Slowly, a new team began to take shape, one that valued precision over posturing, transparency over bravado. We went line by line through Halverton's contracts, stripping out rot that had been left to fester for years. Inflated fees were dismantled, conflicts of interest exposed, and hidden kickbacks excised. Every time a correction went through, city partners who had once turned cold began to return calls. Trust didn't come back all at once, but the first flickers appeared, tentative but real. There were no headlines, no applause. The press still circled, hungry for spectacle. But I gave them nothing. Our progress lived in spreadsheets, reconciled accounts, and municipal officials who began to believe that Halverton might still have a future. Integrity, once discarded, was being rebuilt brick by brick, in the shadows. We were crafting something stronger than reputation. We were restoring truth to the numbers, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the cost of Malcolm's insult came full circle. 6 months passed before the noise settled into something resembling stability. The headlines that once shredded Halverton had quieted. Regulators remained. Auditors hovered, but the panic had ebbed. Contracts were cleaner now, partners less wary. The company hadn't regained its former shine, but it had stopped bleeding. In its place stood something leaner, chastened, and at least for now, honest. I kept my distance from the spotlight. I didn't attend the shareholder briefings or the board's staged reconciliations. My work lived in the fine print, buried in clauses that no one bothered to parade before cameras. And that was enough. During a city audit, I sat across from a team of officials reviewing the restructured bond agreements. The air was thick with tension, each line scrutinized as if one wrong digit could collapse everything again. Beside me, a new vice president, nervous, young, still trying to find his footing, shifted uneasily. After a long pause, he leaned closer. "What started all this?" he whispered, eyes darting toward the auditors as though the answer itself might be dangerous. I looked at him for a moment, measuring the weight of the question. Then I allowed myself the faintest smile. "One line," I said softly. 7 words. "You're only worth that pocket change." He blinked, uncertain whether I was serious, but I knew the truth. Sharper than any ledger could capture, that single insult, meant to humiliate me, had cost Halverton 75% of its value. It had burned through reputations, toppled careers, and reshaped the company from the inside out. Those words had become the most expensive sentence in Halverton's history. The auditors closed their folders with a nod of approval, marking the end of another grueling review. Around us, tension loosened into quiet relief. I gathered my notes, sliding them back into the folder I always carried, the faint smile still resting on my lips. The numbers had spoken, the work was steady, and the legacy was intact. And I knew some words could never be taken back, no matter how hard the company tried to forget.